let's go ahead and take a leap forward from the breakthrough ideas that we talked about this morning to what it takes to turn an idea into an innovation at scale, a true upgrade in reality. Dan Bona is professor of computer science and electrical engineering at Stanford. Vab Goel is back there. Vab is coming. Extra applause for Vab. Thank you. Okay. That works well the way to get extra applause that way, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Vab Goel is founding partner at NTT VC, which is an independent venture capital firm formed in collaboration with NTT. Shahid Ahmed is right to my left, is an executive vice president at New Ventures and Innovation at NTT. And Giorgio Scarpelli is chief technology and innovation officer at NTT Data Italia. Thank you all for coming and joining. And we had a really good discussion this morning that talked on basic research. And this afternoon, we're going to really talk about how do we go from basic research really into innovation and all the way to market. And I think for purposes of this discussion, there's many folks of innovation, but types of innovation. What I'm hoping we can think about is innovations that can go to scale. And that idea that it really has, an innovation can be an innovation, but for really to make an impact in the world, it's got to scale. And we'll talk about what scaling means. So hopefully we'll talk about what does it take to get to market? How do we go from proof of concept to prototyping to launching and expanding reach? So that all these ideas, like some of those you just heard about, can truly impact the world. I wonder if I can just start, Shahid, by beginning with you and having each of you just tell folks a little bit about your background and the perspective that you're coming to this discussion with.
Well, thanks, everyone, and thanks for listening. I know it's the lunch hour here. So, yeah, my background is in consulting and technology. I was at Accenture for 20 years, but don't hold that against me. But at New Ventures and Innovation here at NTT Limited, we incubate new ideas and then bring them to market.
Okay.
One of our latest products and services is around private 5G and edge, and that's all the rage in recent months. And we're seeing a lot of traction in the market.
Okay, terrific. Dan, please.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for inviting us, and thank you for setting up this wonderful event. So let's see, I'm Dan Bonnet. I'm a professor of computer science at Stanford University, just down the road here. I primarily work on cryptography, but in the last couple of years, I've been focused on applications of cryptography to the blockchain area. And I also work with the Andreessen Horowitz Crypto Fund. It's an exciting, the blockchain space is super duper exciting. And when it comes to scale and innovation, it's an area that really drives quite a lot of technology. And I'm looking forward to telling you about that.
Can't wait. All right, Vab, please.
I started my career being an internet engineer at Sprint when internet backbone from East Coast to West Coast was 1.5 megabit. So we have came a long way. I help launch multiple new services while I work for communication companies. For the last 23 years, I've been very fortunate to be in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, working with some of the brightest minds for business plan from a napkin to building a large companies. I myself also have been co-founder of a few companies, and I'm also serves on the board of NTT Data Services.
Excellent. Nice to have you here. Giorgio.
Thanks, Paul. I'm graduated in math, and in my career I covered almost all the process we are focusing today, because I started as an academic researcher. Then I moved in an R&D department of a big company. Then I participated in the carve-out of a new company whose purpose was to commercialize the result, the outcome of the R&D department. Then I created my own startup, which was in the cybersecurity space, was successful enough, and after several steps in merge and acquisition, I entered the NTT Data family, and today I'm the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer. And again, I'm dealing with the relationship with the academia, with the startups, with the external ecosystems. That is very exciting for me.
Okay, terrific. Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover here, and I wonder, this morning, as I mentioned, we talked about basic research, and I wonder in the lives that you're currently living, how important is basic research, and how do you help others look at that research and find the opportunities? And I wonder if we can begin here.
Yeah, let me first say that the technology life cycle is changing very, very rapidly. That's an understatement here in Silicon Valley. What was a cool technology even just months ago is no longer a cool technology. It's a pervasive technology. Everybody's using it. So those cycles used to be, take about a year, 2 years. Now it's taking months, and even sometimes.
Why do you think that happened?
Well, for one, is the technology cost of technology is coming down.
Okay.
Starting with the chipsets. If you look at historically, chipset prices have been declining very steadily, and yet that's also improving the performance and the speed and storage. So I think the cost of technology through cloud and other IT technologies has been steadily declining.
Okay.
And that created an environment where new technologies can be recycled and cycled very, very quickly.
Got it. Okay. And in terms of thinking about spotting opportunities, and if you look at basic research and if you're saying this is what I'm looking for, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask our colleague from Stanford.
I have a lot to say, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to jump into my own view of things, but why don't you finish your thought?
Well, for me, even just blockchain as an example.
Please.
That came from the crypto world, very, very academic. I studied that in computer science way back in the day myself. But it, took 10, even 15 years to really get an application. Now, there's all kinds of interesting applications that popped up just last 2 years, including NFTs and lots of different crypto tokens. And we saw some of that implode right in front of us. But the real value behind crypto and blockchain is within the enterprise side, as an example, right? And I think I'm looking forward to those types of applications come back up to the top, as opposed to some of the other consumer-based applications that we saw, at least from a blockchain perspective, that didn't really pan out the way everybody expected it to be.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'll give a very different perspective. So I guess I'll give the view from academia, since that's where I spend all of my time. And so I can tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and for me, there's like literally a recurrent pattern that I've observed in my life and generally in research. There are things that we develop as researchers, mostly for intellectual curiosity, that seem to have kind of no applications at the time that we do it. Maybe we can come up with a story that, seems kind of maybe something that seems reasonable as a way that maybe there would be interest in the future. But at the time that we do it, there is no commercial, direct commercial application.
Okay.
And we do it just because it's interesting, it's technically deep, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. And then, repeatedly in my life, what has happened is things that look like they are theory today, you roll the clock, 2, 3, 10 years forward, and all of a sudden it finds like a commercial application, and boom, the entire commercial world kind of focuses their attention on it, and the area just mushrooms and becomes super practical and drives a lot of innovation, a lot of startups.
Give me an example of what you're thinking of.
Yeah, so actually I have to say there's this beautiful example that it's a technology, many of you have heard of it. It's called zero-knowledge proofs. It's now kind of a buzzword in Silicon Valley and in the world at large. It used to be a very theoretical concept. So zero-knowledge proofs were invented back in the 1980s, almost 40 years ago. And for a long time, these were like completely theoretical things. There wasn't a whole lot that, you could say there were a few things that they were good for, but by and large, the vision of zero-knowledge proofs sort of lived in the realm of theory. It wasn't something that could be used for anything practical. And all of a sudden, two things happened. One thing that happened was in the early 2010s, there was like a major innovation that brought them much closer to practice. So I like to say that something is theoretical until one idea comes up and boom, it becomes practical. So that was one thing that happened. And the other thing that happened is all of a sudden these proof systems became like an enabling block for the future further developments of blockchains. It came to the point where now they cannot develop to their next level without properly developing and deploying these proof systems, these zero-knowledge proofs. And as a result, the entire kind of blockchain ecosystem kind of focused on this technology. And I have not seen anything like this in the last, in kind of the last couple of years. This thing went from being completely theoretical to being the most practical thing in the world, where now there are literally dozens of companies deploying these tools and relying on it for their business. So the point I'd like to make is that things that seem like theory at the time that they were developed, within, they could stay as theoretical, but very often, and this happens again and again and again, within a few years, sort of one idea and one commercial application just makes this flower sort of mushroom and enable things that we haven't seen before. So it's remarkable to see this happening. And by the way, zero-knowledge proofs is just one example. Maybe if you have time, I can kind of go through many other examples like this. It's kind of a recurrent pattern that I've seen throughout my life, and we see in research. And I would say that this is kind of the reason why it's important to support basic research in theory, because at the time that it's developed, maybe it seems a little far out, but then one idea and one application kind of makes the whole thing explode.
How do you spot it, which is the second part of that question is, I'm sure you knew all about zero-knowledge proofs coming out well before they were done, and you called it. But for other people that aren't spotting things that easy, how do you keep an eye out for them?
That's a very, very interesting point. I think it's actually really quite important. Communication here is really quite important. So there are old ideas that are sort of lying in the wake, waiting for the commercial application to appear. And the sad thing that sometimes happens is that the commercial application appears, and somehow the fact that the result is already known and exists is sort of forgotten.
I see.
Yeah, and so as a result, that really slows down innovation, in that now industry has to go and develop the field, and things get developed incorrectly, things get developed more slowly, and so it's really, communication is quite important. We have to keep kind of going through our treasure chest of theoretical results and constantly be communicating them to industry, saying, here are all the things that are possible, here are all the things we can do, and then, it just takes one of you guys in the audience to say, this is exactly the problem that I'm facing in my company, and then the sort of thing takes off.
Okay, great. Please, Vab.
Yeah, I actually have two examples about why the basic research is important. I don't know about how many of these people in the room. I wouldn't be sitting here if it's not for a basic research. Someone from DARPA funded, Stanford and other universities, inventing the thing called TCP/IP, right?
Right.
The DARPANET called, right?
Yep.
A lot of the progress we really have made in last 25 years on communicating, connecting the words together, right? And some of the best companies which have built are because of the internet. So that's one. Another thing, we wouldn't be probably sitting here, some of us at least, if the basic research around the COVID vaccines.
You're right.
Which was basically, like 15, 20 years ago was done. So those are the two examples really comes into my mind that why basic research is important. I don't need to go anymore. Our health, we are here, and our wealth is because of internet. So those are the two things, health and wealth. The other point I will also make, right, is you said something very important, right? How do you commercialize it, right? The real answer is nobody knows. Right? Because you have to do so many research, and something is going to become successful, some things not. But does that mean you stop it? No, because you just can't stop. But there is no one path how you do it. But one of the paths I believe is really critical is the decision which NTT made, right, to opening the research in America, then in Silicon Valley. Right? And instead of sending someone from Japan, right, from a research center to run it, appointing Gomi-san to run it, you have a businessman and a visionary person, right, who was very early on helped grow the internet. So having the mix of researchers with the people who understand the business, right, who have relationship with the commercial clients, I think becomes important, right? It's like, if you want to win the car race, only driver can't. You have someone who designed the car, and then you need the people on the racetrack, who's keeping up with the cars, tracking the sensors and providing that stuff. So to me we talked about, right? I mean, why does Stanford basically always seems to be taking a lot more ideas, right? Sun Microsystem was basically also the other amazing company comes out of compute side from Stanford. I think having relationships, right, directly or indirectly with businesses or thought leaders who understands how to take idea and build it a large company, regardless if it comes from research or somewhere else, I think is important. It's all about team.
Okay, excellent. Giorgio.
Yeah, I think that the basic research will provide the building blocks of innovation. If you mind innovation, the process to change and transform the business of a company. The point is that sometimes business is not able to understand the basic research. And sometimes basic research is not able to understand the business. So the point is how to merge the two visions, staying together, working together, basic research, academia, and company R&D department, for instance, will be a good idea. The point is that basic research should also consider in advance the requirements from business. Otherwise, it risks to be too sectorial, too focusing, and maybe approaching a specific problem, but with a kind of difficulties in entering the market. So in our experience, exploring since the beginning how the innovation trends are going to be realized by exploring the basic research will be a good approach for a company. But we have to create the condition. So an example is, for instance, the Innovation Center is an initiative we launched at NTT Data level, global level, in which we created 6 innovation centers in several different geographies in the world. Each of these focusing on a specific topics, such as metaverse, quantum computing, human, digital twin, things like that. It is not just a place where researchers and maybe innovators can join their vision, their background, but also a space, a physical space surrounded by technologies where we invite clients in order to be inspired by the technology. We love to call technology also inspiring technology because several problems can be solved with a technological perspective. Sometimes I discuss with my colleague from the design because they say you have to start always by business, by the need of the clients. True, but sometimes we lose what I call serendipity, the fact that we find something that we are not looking for.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
And you can do this just if we are able to connect the dot between things that apparently are not connected. And in order to do this, you have to have a spot on the basic research, for instance.
Okay, so the serendipity is an interesting transition to the next question I wanted to touch on with you guys. And Vab, maybe I can start with this, because you're seeing ideas, and Shahid, I'm sure you are too, but you're being pitched a torrent of ideas. And it may be serendipity, right place at right time, but more often than not, you're going to have a vision where you're going to say, wait a minute, this is an idea that we can build upon. How do you spot those ideas, and what sparks something that catches you?
Please. I think it's an art than a science.
Okay.
And a lot of times you get it wrong, but you just move on, right? So that's the first thing I want to just tell you. So don't just follow what I'm going to say, right? I think for me, what the person who's pitching you that idea, what he has done, right, is important, right?
His professional background.
The professional background, and not just being in a large company, it's okay, but within large company, have you done something? Did you stand for something? Because more than idea depends, is this person is going to be adjust and adopt, because you have to go to the valleys to create a company. The other point really is the stuff he's talking about, right? What do I know about it, right? Do I have a domain knowledge, or I know the people who may know the domain, so I can quickly pick up a phone after that and call, hey, can you meet this person? You know, it seems pretty convincing and pretty good. So to me, having the network, the human network, to being able to get that feedback. And the last one is the gut, right? The gut feel is because, you know, we don't know everything, and there is no trademark. You know, some of the best companies are built by, you look at Facebook right out of the college, right? So I think talking to a lot of people and having the network, and then of course you need a lot of luck.
Okay. Shahid, how would you feel about that?
I think a lot of luck goes a long way. But you have to create your own luck.
Okay.
And I think, to what Vab said, I think you need some resiliency also in the idea so that you can pivot to
I see. Okay. Yep.
different model. You know, one thing I would say always is, yeah, you might have a great idea, but is there a market for it? Is there a product fit? Like Vab always calls me out on that. And so sometimes you have to create that fit. As a marketeer, you have to go create that market because there isn't that awareness. Some customers don't know what they want.
Yeah.
And
Can I add to that actually something before I forget? I'm sorry about this point. You know, a lot of people pitch you ideas, right?
Of course.
All of us in our business, this room, right? One of the key thing about the idea is you validate, right, for potential buyers. And you also basically create advisors, right? So you go to the experts yourself when you come up with ideas and sign them up as a potential advisor or as a reference. So when people pitch you ideas, it's like show up, nice looking PowerPoints, or they say, hey, we have talked to 10 prospect customers or competition, or we have signed up.
So you have a gut idea, but then you check it out.
You check it out. So there's two ways. You have a gut idea and build a PowerPoint and say, I need the money or I want to do this, versus, hey, I got the idea now, let me talk to some prospect customers, even though they're basically I'm going to be ready in 3 years, but let me validate that, right? What I'm thinking from the potential buyers. B, I'm smart enough that, hey, I should sign up few advisors, right? Either a technical advisor or a business advisor. So those are the kind of things when they show up as a package very early on, you get a little bit more attention than saying, hey, I'm going to build a supercomputer because blah, 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 right? But you haven't talked to anybody.
Yep.
Then they get a little bit less attention, especially if you have never built any computer before.
Dan, is this resonating with you? You're a little earlier in the food chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say actually as a researcher, I think we take a slightly different approach in that the question is always sort of where is the world going, right? So the key point is not to be shackled by the constraints of the current world.
Okay.
And to think about, what will life look like in 10 years, in 20 years? What would technology enable? And you mentioned like east-west bandwidth was like 1.5 megabytes 20 years ago. Netflix would have seemed like science fiction back then, and today we take it for granted. Right. So as a researcher, you're supposed to say, well, of course the network is going to get faster, and what's that going to enable, and what would be the interesting research questions that come out of that? My favorite saying is that good science fiction writers, they predict cars, and great science fiction writers, they predict traffic jams. And as researchers, we're supposed to be great science fiction writers.
Okay.
Sure, anyone can predict the network is going to be faster. But what does that actually mean for the world? So what are the interesting open research problems that a fast network would enable? And so today, there are similar questions on the horizon, right? So we know, obviously, the first example that comes to mind these days is machine learning, right? I mean, so you can imagine what would the world look like when machine learning can do a lot more than what it can do today? That's kind of an obvious question. But, I'll say kind of more general questions like, NTT Research has a whole quantum computing research group, right? So you could ask, well, in 20, 30, 50 years, we might have these quantum computers that can do things that we can't do today. What does that mean for the world? How does it change things? Another example that I like to give, I always like to challenge my students with this example, is, in a few decades, we're going to have a moon base. We're going to have a Mars base. When it comes to do TCP/IP with the moon, with Mars, TCP/IP takes multiple round trips to just set up a session. If it takes you 20 minutes to do
UDP for that, not TCP.
That's exactly a fantastic research question, right? So as researchers, we're supposed to exactly ask this question. If it takes 20 minutes to do one round trip, what does the network look like? What does the cryptography look like, right? Today, if you want to establish an SSL, a TLS connection with a remote site, that takes 3 round trips back and forth. that's simply not going to work with when we need to do this with the Moon and the Mars bases. So like one difficulty of setting up a Mars base is coming up with a cryptography that will enable us to communicate securely between the two places. Maybe this is thinking a little bit too far ahead, but I think this is kind of the important mindset that you need to be in when you're doing research.
Absolutely. Did you have some thoughts on this, Giorgio?
Yeah, I think that the best ideas comes from the cross-pollination of different background, different culture, different approaches.
Okay.
So we have to somehow create the condition, like in nature, about such cross-pollination. And to me, there are two main aspects to underline. First is a personal attitude of people in order to participate in the idea generation process, which requires two main characteristics: courage and curiosity.
Courage and?
Curiosity.
Okay.
Yes, curiosity, because of course you should be interested in to look beyond your normal duties and your normal knowledge. And courage, because sometimes for being curious, you should break the bubble, you break the rules, sometimes reshaping some well-consolidated process. And for sure, for guaranteeing this happening, you have to create the environment, create the condition. If you look at a company like us, for instance, we have to accept different point of view. We have to accept the failure. We have to accept that someone goes out of the boundary of the specific duties. So you need to create the innovation posture of your company in this sense. It is important to leverage people. People is the key for generating innovation and through new ideas, leveraging this kind of contamination.
Okay. We had a briefing call before we all talked, and one of the takeaways that seemed so obvious when it was said, but it wasn't in my mind, was the idea that as you guys are thinking, oftentimes you're thinking about features, products, or companies. And thinking about it on three different levels, and maybe there's more. But tell me how you set up your minds when you're thinking about it in those three different distinctions. And Dan, I'm not sure if that was your point that was on the call, but...
Yeah, but actually, maybe if my colleagues here could start with
okay.
that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we, just recently launched our private 5G
Can you explain what private 5G
is? Private 5G, so 5G, everybody knows 5G, right? You hopefully have seen that on your phone by now. That's offered typically by a carrier like AT&T, T-Mobile, or Verizon. What we are offering is a private solution that is on-premise that you could build for yourself for your own purpose. So it's 5G extension of your LAN, as an example.
Okay.
So if you have a Wi-Fi, it's similar to Wi-Fi, but it's 5G. And I'm oversimplifying this, but that's kind of how it's designed to operate. So back to that, my original point was, I think you also have to be able to pivot. It's a great idea to have a private 5G solution, but you have to be agile enough to change your feature, to match the product with the demand, and be able to be agile enough to change your business.
So you may start saying it's a product and then realize, no, it's a feature. It's not a product.
It could be, yeah, or security could be a feature. It could be a key feature in it. It's no longer performance or speeds of feeds. It could be something like security, or the reverse. It could be, hey, it's just great coverage, back to the basics. So, the point I'm making is that if you're launching a new service, a new product, be able to pivot very, very quickly, because the market is shifting it's very dynamic, as everybody knows. And customer requirements are changing constantly. Technology shifts are happening all the time. So you got to adapt.
Okay. Can I please ask Dan?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that this categorization that you have of features, products, and startups, I think it is very important to keep in mind when coming up with a new idea that you want to commercialize. So some ideas are fantastic ideas, but they're kind of a feature in a larger product. Yeah, and we see that often actually with privacy technology. Yeah, and I can tell you many years ago, we tried to convince a bunch of the large tech companies to adopt a particular geolocation privacy technology. And for them, it was actually very difficult. Like we were thinking of this as kind of a product that one could launch, but it was very clear that this is like maybe a small feature in some larger mapping system or navigation system. And what's interesting there is effectively something is a feature if it's very easy for somebody else who has a similar product to also incorporate that feature into their product. You wouldn't launch an entire company just for something that's a feature. Yeah, that's kind of a very important.
How do you distinguish though? The gut human reaction is probably not to create a feature; it's to create a company.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true at all. So it depends on what your perspective is. So as a researcher, again, I'm thrilled if we can create a feature that a lot of different companies adopt. Success. That's a fantastic thing. For a large company like NTT, of course, I think you want to adopt those kind of features into your products, right? Because it makes the products better compared to your competitors. So. The distinction I think is again between a feature and a startup is effectively how difficult or easy is it to incorporate it into a larger system.
If I can just pick up on that, because you mentioned zero knowledge proofs, that one offshoot of that feature, if you will, was zero trust network access, ZTNA, right? And there's now big companies, Zscaler is an example, just take a look at its stock price. But they picked up on that specific notion and built a company around it. But it's not necessarily zero knowledge proof, which is very different than ZTNA. But it started from that notion. But you can't build a company out of a single, let's say academic research or a feature, if you will. But you have to be careful because you can easily see a variety of different companies pop up with similar features, but the next level of set of features that are better, faster, cheaper.
Vab, from your perspective, are you disappointed when you decide an idea is a feature and not a company?
Well, I think depends which seat I'm sitting on, right? So if I'm sitting as a board of director of NTT companies, at that point, sometimes actually features are very important in order to keep the customer engaged and in order to basically compete with the competition and to keep the services alive and grow the revenue. And one thing comes to mind is I think, and we're going a little bit away from the research, so I will come back, but Google AdWords, right? I mean, looked like to me that was invented inside the Google when the company was already there. They were doing search. They didn't know how to monetize beyond powering AOL and Yahoo from the back. And then they came up with that. Someone came over there with the AdWord. I mean, it looked like to me as a feature, but look at what they did to Google. So to me, I think you cannot really depend where you are. So if you go to the basic research, right, you can't. And I'm not a researcher, so I don't dare to really think about it, like how all the stuff works and stuff. But you can't think of it's going to be company and stuff. So it depends on which seat you are on, what role you are on. So I think, to me, feature, service, and a company, all these three things are important.
Okay.
And at a different time.
But as a VC, for example,
so
I think you have
as a venture capitalist, actually, thank you for actually reminding me my full-time job.
Dan, do you want to sit here? Because that was really good.
Yeah, I think as a venture capitalist, right, who gives money, I think we always shoot for basically to the company, right, and a very large company. That's what we look for. So, yeah.
Excellent. Giorgio, how about from your perspective? How are you thinking about
I
this?
bring here the perspective of a company that looks, first of all, to ideas that can change the game in solving, for instance, a problem for our clients. So one aspect that we should evaluate from an idea that could be a feature, a company, or a product is the ability to solve a problem with an original perspective.
Okay.
So in this sense, feature or product should be open, so should be scalable, should be adaptable, flexible. So a lot of characteristics that are necessary to be investigated in order to understand if they can actually go through the business. If we look at companies, we look at partners. So the characteristic that we expect from a company is to share our perspective. We should be on the same page also in terms of values, in terms of strategic vision. And in this case, we are used to integrate the offering of maybe companies that could become partner of us only if they are complementary to what we are already able to do by ourselves. So it's a different perspective if we consider the venture capitalists, because they have to put money in a company if they foresee kind of growth perspective in terms of financial aspects. But for us, it's important to consider all the aspects in the perspective of solving a problem for our clients. So these aspects are those that we evaluate first.
Okay. When we began this session, we talked about the importance of scalability in deciding on ideas. And maybe based on this conversation of features, products, or companies, scalability is not the big question on the table, but I'd like you guys to talk about that. How do you think, Dan, about scalability? And if you think about an idea, do you automatically get it and then say, can I scale it, or how does that work?
Oh boy, so you're asking the academic about how to scale things. Well, actually, if there's one thing we learned is that academics, we're not supposed to actually release products.
Okay.
So we've done that a couple of times, and people then ask us to maintain the products.
Okay.
But the students are already gone, and it becomes very, very, very difficult, obviously. So I guess when we want to take an idea to the next level, the next thing to do is to create a startup, right? And I have to tell you, the startups don't usually come from, or they're not primarily driven by professors. They're primarily driven by students, of course. So they need to go when they graduate. They're wondering what to do next. And so, I guess at Stanford we're very fortunate that really all we have to do is get in the car, drive up Sand Hill Road, and try and pitch the idea and see how it goes. So that's kind of that's our scaling path, right?
But do you think about, if you're working with students, do you challenge them on scalability as something that they have to be thinking about?
Yeah, of course. That goes without saying. If something is, a fit, I guess this also has to do with, total accessible market and such, TAM.
Yep.
In general. If something doesn't have a very large TAM, that's not a very interesting to explore further. And so that is kind of the first thing we look at. I'm sure you guys do the same. But I would say that kind of much more important than that is the actual product market fit question. That really is, do people actually want to use what you are proposing here?
Yeah, I mean, if I can add,
please.
I mean, I'm used to that product market fit question all the time. But let's take GPT-4 just got released yesterday. How many of you guys played with it?
Amazing.
Yeah, I had to do a differential calculus question, and I put it in there, and it within seconds answered it very eloquently. And then I asked it to draw a wire diagram for a website. I took a picture of something I drew on a napkin on a plane, by the way, and I uploaded that, and it drew me a wireframe diagram for that website that it imagined it would be. Now, is there a product fit? Is there a scale associated with it? What we're seeing with AI, particularly with GPT-4 and OpenAI, is akin to web, World Wide Web, if you will. And it's very transformational. Talk about scale. That I don't think they were thinking about scale when they were building this.
You're right.
They weren't. But just because they opened it up to the masses, people like me and all the students and my 11-year-old, it has really ushered a source of imagination none of us really had until now.
Right.
And so Yeah, do you think about scale when you're thinking about an idea? I bet those guys at OpenAI weren't thinking about it that way.
Okay, Vab?
I think scale starts from second minute, because when someone is pitching your idea as a venture capitalist, I'm talking now, first thing that comes to mind is the entrepreneur, the founder. Can he scale? Right?
So that's a leadership question.
But it's scale.
Right.
Actually, it's not leadership. The word we use actually in venture capital language is scale, right? Can he scale, right? When we hire the first sales leader, is it a 0 to 1, 5 to 10, 10 to 50? So I think scale is very important. In my business, I will say the first question always comes in. We take it for granted the technology they're building can be built, and it can work and scale. But I think to me is about the human part of it that becomes the most important.
Okay, that's a different twist on scale than I was thinking, but you're going to lead me very nicely into the next path. And so, Giorgio, I'm going to maybe move this into, because I think inevitably the part of building any of these things comes from spotting leaders and spotting people that could be teams. How do you think about what Vab was talking about when you're doing it in your world?
Yeah, I think that people is crucial to evaluate also the scalability. At the end, scalability is something that you have to evaluate towards different domains. For instance, technical scalability, for sure. You have to create a product that is ready to scale in terms of numbers, in terms of performance. But we have to also evaluate business scalability, because you have to consider if your product or solution could ramp up in the market appropriately, but also your organization capability to scale up. So this means the mentality of people living there, the willingness to become big. Sometimes it is not natural moving from being a small startup with a specific focus on a specific aspect that maybe is enough for generating a certain level of business to the next stage.
Okay.
That means that you need people with the right commitment for doing this, that are able to set up the right organization, leveraging products that can count on a kind of architectural design, for instance, in order to be ready to scale. All these aspects are, again, related to the attitude of people to grow up on a certain page.
Okay. Well, one of the, and if we have time, I want to ask about this, but I was reading an analysis of what happened with SVB, and the writer of the piece ended up saying, well, they only looked for founders and leaders who were like them, and so they got into groupthink, and that was one of the things that actually led to their problems. How does this idea in your mind of spotting leaders, thinking about leaders, how do you look outside what you may say is an obvious person that should be able to do something?
Yeah, herd mentality is clearly very dangerous, as we just recently discovered, especially in the tech space, right? And hopefully Vab will offer his perspective on the whole SVB saga. But I think diversity is a big point. I think you mentioned that. You have to have not only diversity of thinking, but different backgrounds. That will drive innovation and product development in a way that is.
When you say different backgrounds, what does that mean?
So even in my team, I have people with strong technology acumen, but also very good marketing acumen.
Okay.
And then there is folks that just have a variety of different backgrounds from in the business side. So I think that's important, because you could have a very strong personality driving a technology agenda, but not necessarily a very good, say, business agenda or go-to-market perspective. And so, yeah, I think diversity of ideas, especially in the product creation, early stages of product development, is crucial.
Okay. Is that talked about in your world very much?
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. I think I think just to build on what you just said, I think it's being a strong communicator is really quite important. You have to be able to communicate your ideas. You have to be able to get people excited about where you're headed. That enables you to hire more people, hire the right people, and so on. So definitely, I would say if strong communication skills are kind of absolutely necessary in this area.
Okay. I'm really concerned looking at the clock and realizing I don't have a lot of time, and I've got 100 more questions to ask. So I'm going to look at the list and pull out some that are really jumping out at me. But one of them, and I don't know who to start this with, but we're in a global marketplace in a pretty significant way right now, and the world has a lot of tensions in it. And I'm wondering, in this whole world and the geopolitical pressures, how is that something that you think about, that you navigate, or do you say, something, we have to do what we're doing, and that's not necessarily something we have to put a lot of energy into?
I think that the vision of what is going on in this moment is crucial for us, first of all, to understand the future. I think that vision of the future is an aspect we have to consider in our perspective as a company or as a researcher, trying to understand what is going on. Also considering what happened recently for the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank.
Uh-huh.
So I was reflecting what's the impact of this to our perspective. So, of course, we are concerned for possible financial impact.
Okay.
But we discovered that there is a weakness in the system that is why we are in this situation. Because maybe looking at the startup ecosystem, they live in a kind of bubble sometimes. They have their ceremony, their rituality. They ask funds for maybe 3-year investment for generating an MVP. So my question is, are those people prepared to fade with the market, actually? Are those people able to be resilient toward a normal phenomenon that is increase of rates, interest rates? So we have to, my consideration in this is we should realize a kind of back to basic approach.
I'm going to cut you off because I only have 2.5 minutes. I want to ask a question that I hope everybody will also really appreciate. But I'd love you to each just go down the line and say, as guys that are masters of innovation and spotting innovation, what is it that you're really excited about right now that's coming or you think is coming?
I'll be very brief. I think AI and generative AI is something, obviously, and it's very clear to this crowd here. It's something we need to all pay attention to. It has ethical implications. It has political implications. So it can be, and I don't want to call out AI as a technology that's dangerous. People are dangerous. Technology is never dangerous. We have to make sure that it is used in the right way.
Okay. Dan.
By the way, I can tell you the large language model class in our department was the largest last quarter. It was the largest class in the department. Not surprisingly, everybody is interested. I would say that the way I'd answer your question is honestly, I'm excited by the technology that's being driven by blockchains. Yeah. So when you look at the science behind blockchains, it's really quite remarkable. It's driving the development of distributed systems, cryptography, programming languages, verification tools, economics, political science. There's just so much new technology that's being driven by this ecosystem that is super exciting to me.
Okay.
For me, computer science, compute and storage, coming together with healthcare data is going to be game-changing. We're going to make more advance in next 10 years than we did probably in 50 and 100 years before.
My goodness.
So I think I want to live more healthier as I age. And we have so many diseases which we need to cure. And understanding human brain, we're dealing with, we talk about, now I'm going to go back and answer your question for a second, right? We're talking about what's coming in the future issues, but now social media have such a huge impact on the kids' brains, always on, adults are having mental health challenges, and we need better understanding. So I think for that, healthcare, data, compute, AI, ML, whatever you can apply it.
All great answers. So. Giorgio, wrap us up.
Rapidly, I mentioned hyper-automation and the merge between physical and digital world for a new human-centric experience.
Okay. Look at that, right at the bottom line. You guys are wonderful. I can't wait to see if all the things we're talking about as they developed, and you kept us all wanting more. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.